Security! I need security here now. Richard Thornton's voice echoed through Terminal 3 of San Francisco International Airport, his finger pointed directly at me like a loaded weapon. This woman just stole $15,000 from our company account. Every head in the departure lounge turned toward us. Business travelers paused mid-sip of their overpriced lattes. Families froze with boarding passes in hand. The TSA agents near the security checkpoint straightened up, hands moving instinctively toward their radios. My name is Lily Chun, and I'm 34 years old. 6 years ago, I started as a junior account manager at Thornton Digital Solutions, working my way up to senior financial coordinator. 6 years of 60-hour weeks, skipped lunches, and sacrificed weekends. 6 years of watching Richard take credit for my strategies while paying me 30% less than my male colleagues. I never imagined those 6 years would end like this, accused of theft in front of 300 strangers. My carry-on bag being ripped from my shoulder by airport security. "Sir, we need you to calm down," the security officer said, positioning himself between Richard and me. His name tag read Officer Martinez. Calm down? Richard's face was crimson, a vein pulsing at his temple. He thrust his phone toward the officer, showing what appeared to be a bank statement. She transferred company funds into her personal account this morning, right before trying to flee to New York. The crowd pressed closer, phones emerging from pockets. I could already imagine the headlines. Tech employee caught stealing at airport. In this age of viral videos, my face would be everywhere by dinner time. But here's what Richard didn't know. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't panicking. In fact, the slight smile that threatened to break across my face was becoming harder to suppress with each word that spilled from his lying mouth. "Miss Chun, is this true?" Officer Martinez asked, his tone professional but cautious. Behind him, 2 more security personnel had arrived, flanking us like we were about to start a brawl in the middle of the terminal. "Officer, I can explain everything," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private?" "There's nothing to discuss." Richard stepped forward, his expensive Italian leather shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "I have bank records, I have timestamps." She thought she could steal from me and disappear to the East Coast for her business trip. He made air quotes with his fingers, his Rolex catching the fluorescent light. What Richard also didn't know was that for the past 6 months I'd been documenting everything. Every inappropriate comment, every stolen idea, every instance of financial manipulation he'd blamed on accounting errors. The small recording device I'd purchased on Amazon for $49 had become my constant companion. Tucked discreetly in my blazer pocket during every meeting, every confrontation, every suspicious conversation. The thing about working for a narcissist is that they always underestimate you. They're so convinced of their own superiority that they never imagine you might be 3 steps ahead. "Miss Chun, I'm going to need you to come with us," Officer Martinez said, gesturing toward a door marked Security Office near Gate 47. "You too, sir." As we walked through the terminal, I caught sight of my reflection in the massive windows overlooking the tarmac. I looked remarkably composed for someone whose entire career was supposedly imploding. My black blazer was unwrinkled. My hair was still neatly pulled back. Even my expression remained neutral, almost serene. Richard walked behind me already on his phone. "Jerry, it's Richard. Yeah, she's being detained right now." "I told you she was shady." "I want her access revoked to everything, email, systems, everything, and get legal on the phone. I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent." 3 months ago, I'd noticed the first real discrepancy. A client payment of $22,000 that appeared in our books but never reached the client's account. When I'd asked Richard about it, he'd smiled that condescending smile and said, "You focus on your job, Lily. Let me worry about the big picture." 2 months ago, I'd discovered his private ledger, the one he thought was hidden behind encrypted files on the shared server. Turned out, using Thornton 2024 as your password isn't as clever as he thought. 1 month ago, I'd contacted 3 different attorneys, a forensic accountant, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Everything was ready. Everything was documented. I just needed Richard to make one final, arrogant mistake. And here we were. The security office was smaller than I'd expected. Just a gray room with a metal desk, 3 chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner. Officer Martinez gestured for us to sit. Richard immediately launched into his rehearsed victim speech. "I trusted her with everything," he said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "Access to accounts, client information, financial passwords. This is why you can't trust." He stopped himself. But we all knew what he was about to say. Officer Martinez's jaw tightened slightly. "Sir, let's stick to the facts. Ms. Chun, what's your response to these accusations?" I opened my purse slowly, deliberately. Inside was my phone, my wallet, and a small USB drive that I'd been carrying with me everywhere for the past week. The USB drive contained 6 months of recordings, documents, and evidence that would not only clear my name but destroy Richard's entire empire of lies. But I didn't reach for it. Not yet. "Officer Martinez," I said calmly, "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. However, before we proceed, I should mention that I've already filed a formal complaint with the FBI regarding financial fraud at Thornton Digital Solutions. They're expecting me to arrive in New York this afternoon for a scheduled interview." The color drained from Richard's face faster than water down a drain. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. "You... what?" he whispered. That's when Officer Martinez's radio crackled to life. "Martinez, we've got 2 federal agents in the main terminal asking for Richard Thornton. They say it's urgent." The next few seconds felt like slow motion. Richard's eyes darted between me, the officer, and the door. His hand trembled as it gripped the armrest of his chair. For 6 years, I'd watched this man intimidate, manipulate, and humiliate everyone around him with absolute confidence. Now, in this small gray room at San Francisco International Airport, I was watching that confidence shatter like glass. "Tell them we're in Security Office B," Martinez said into his radio, his eyes never leaving Richard's face. Then he turned to me. "Miss Chun, I think we need to hear your side of this story. From the beginning." I smiled for the first time since entering the airport that morning. "Officer, I'd be happy to explain everything, but I should warn you, this story might take a while. And Richard here isn't going to enjoy how it ends. If you're invested in finding out how a simple accusation turned into the biggest mistake of Richard's life, you'll want to stay tuned for what happens next. Because what looked like a theft was actually the carefully planned downfall of a man who thought he was untouchable." The question wasn't whether Richard had set me up. The question was, how many laws had he broken while trying to frame me? And did he have any idea that I'd been collecting evidence of every single one? From the beginning. Richard's laugh was sharp, almost hysterical. "Officer, she's playing you." This is a classic manipulation tactic. I've seen it before. Employees caught stealing always try to flip the narrative. Officer Martinez held up his hand. "Mr. Thornton, I asked Miss Chun to speak." "You'll get your turn." I straightened in my chair, folding my hands on the metal table. 6 months ago, one of our biggest clients, Morrison Tech, contacted me directly. They were confused about a payment discrepancy. According to their records, they'd paid us $85,000 for a completed project. According to our books that Richard showed them, they still owed us $30,000. That's because they were late on their payment schedule. Richard interjected, his voice rising. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. She's twisting facts." "Mr. Thornton, final warning," Martinez said, his patience clearly wearing thin. I continued, keeping my voice level. I pulled the payment records myself. Morrison Tech had paid in full, exactly on time. The money had been deposited into our business account on March 15th. But somehow, 30,000 of it had been routed to a secondary account I'd never seen before. When I asked Richard about it, he told me to mind my own business and focus on my secretarial duties. The memory of that conversation still burned. I'd been promoted to senior financial coordinator 2 years prior, but Richard had a habit of demoting me verbally whenever I questioned anything. It was his way of reminding me who held the power. "That's when you started recording conversations?" Officer Martinez asked, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. "Not immediately," I admitted. "At first, I thought it was a genuine mistake. Maybe our accounting software had glitched. Maybe there was an explanation I wasn't seeing. I paused, remembering how naive I'd been. But then it happened again. And again. Always different clients, always different amounts. Small enough to avoid immediate detection, but adding up to serious money over time. Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went a shade paler. "I need to take this," he muttered. "No, you don't," Martinez said flatly. "Continue, Miss Chen." The truth was, the financial discrepancies were only part of the story. Working for Richard Thornton had been like slowly drowning in toxic waste, so gradual that you don't realize you're suffocating until you can't breathe anymore. 3 years ago, I'd pitched a complete rebranding strategy for one of our struggling clients. I'd worked weekends, stayed until midnight, crafted every detail. The presentation was scheduled for a Monday morning. That Sunday night, Richard had called me. "Lily, I need you to send me your presentation files. I want to review them before tomorrow's meeting." I'd sent them, trusting him. The next morning, I'd arrived at the conference room to find Richard presenting my strategy word for word, slide for slide as his own creation. When I tried to speak up, he'd cut me off. "Lily, why don't you take notes? That's what coordinators do." The client had loved it. Richard had received a $20,000 bonus. I'd received a coffee mug that said "Team Player," but I'd stayed. Because I needed the job. Because I had student loans. Because leaving felt like admitting defeat. The door to the security office opened, and 2 people in dark suits entered. The woman flashed a badge. "Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI. This is Special Agent Michael Park. We're looking for Richard Thornton." Richard stood so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Finally. Officers, this woman has stolen from my company, and I want her arrested immediately. I have documentation, bank records, everything you need." Agent Torres's expression didn't change. "Mr. Thornton, we're not here about Miss Chen. We're here about you. We've received a complaint regarding financial fraud, tax evasion, and wire fraud in Thornton Digital Solutions. We'd like you to come with us for questioning." "This is absurd." Richard's voice cracked. "She's obviously made false reports to cover her own crimes. Look at the timing. She steals money this morning and suddenly I'm under investigation." Agent Park stepped forward, his voice calm. "Sir, the investigation was opened 3 weeks ago based on evidence submitted by Ms. Chen and corroborated by forensic accounting. The timing of today's events is actually quite interesting to us." Richard's eyes snapped to me, and for the first time I saw something beyond arrogance. I saw fear. "You've been planning this," he whispered. "You manipulative, Mr. Thornton," Agent Torres interrupted. "We can do this here or we can do this at our field office. Your choice." But Richard wasn't done. He never knew when to stop. "Do you know who I am? My family has connections in this city that go back 3 generations. My uncle is a Superior Court judge. My father golfs with the mayor. You're making a massive mistake." It was so predictable, so perfectly Richard. When caught, he didn't defend himself with facts. He threatened people with his privilege. Agent Torres pulled out her phone and showed Richard the screen. "Is this you, Mr. Thornton? Meeting with Daniel Vasquez at Harbor Prime Restaurant on October 8th? Richard's face went ashen. Daniel Vasquez was a known associate of several money laundering operations. I'd discovered Richard's connection to him when I'd followed him one evening after work. Yes, I'd gone full private investigator mode. When your boss is stealing and you need evidence, you do what's necessary. That was a business dinner," Richard stammered. "Completely legitimate. We have recordings suggesting otherwise," Agent Park said. "Something about offshore accounts and restructuring payments to avoid tax reporting." My heart raced. They'd been building their own case while I'd been building mine. We'd been working parallel investigations without even knowing it. Officer Martinez stood. "I think we're done here. Miss Chen, you're free to go." I apologize for the inconvenience. But Richard wasn't finished imploding. As Agent Torres reached for his arm, he spun toward me. "You think you've won?" "You're nothing, Lily. A nobody from a state school who got lucky. I made you. Without me, you'd still be answering phones at some call center." There it was. The mask fully removed. 6 years of barely concealed contempt now flowing freely. Mr. Thornton, I said quietly, I have a recording of you telling me last month that you'd never let some Asian girl run my company. I have documentation of you paying male employees with identical job titles 40% more than me. I have evidence of you stealing client payments, falsifying tax documents, and creating fraudulent expense reports. And I have recordings of you explicitly detailing your entire scheme to your business partner, Marcus Chen, who coincidentally is cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for immunity. The silence in that room was deafening. Richard's mouth opened and closed. His face cycled through emotions like a broken traffic light, red wage, white with shock, green with nausea. Marcus is cooperating? He finally whispered. Marcus Shen, no relation to me, despite the shared last name, had been Richard's partner for 8 years. He'd also been increasingly uncomfortable with Richard's creative accounting, as he'd called it. When I'd approached him 6 weeks ago with my evidence, he'd broken down crying in a Starbucks parking lot, admitting he'd been looking for a way out for years. Agent Tira's gestured toward the door. Mr. Thornton, we really need to go now. As they let him out, Richard turned back one final time. This isn't over, Lily. My lawyers will destroy you. You'll never work in this industry again. But his threats sounded hollow now. Desperate. The threats of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. Officer Martinez handed me my carry-on bag. Miss Chen, you're clear to catch your flight. Though I suspect you might want to stick around for a few days. I checked my phone. 17 missed calls from other employees at Thornton Digital Solutions, 8 text messages. The news was spreading fast. One text caught my eye. It was from Jennifer Park, our head of HR, the same woman who dismissed my complaints about pay discrimination 6 times over 3 years. Always with the same excuse. Richard says the pay structure is based purely on performance metrics. The text read, Lily, please call me. We need to discuss your future with the company. I almost laughed. Now they wanted to talk about my future. What Richard still didn't understand, what people like him never understand, was that I hadn't just collected evidence against him. I'd built an entire case that exposed the rot at every level of Thornton Digital Solutions. And every person who'd enabled him dismissed my complaints, or looked the other way was about to face their own reckoning. The question now wasn't whether Richard would face justice. The question was how many people would go down with him when the full truth came out, and whether any of them realized that their world was already burning. 6 months earlier, I'd sat in my car in the company parking lot at 11 p.m., hands shaking, staring at the spreadsheet on my laptop screen. The numbers didn't lie. Over the past 18 months, Richard had siphoned nearly $400,000 from client accounts through a web of fake vendors, inflated expenses, and payment redirects. I'd stumbled onto it by accident. A client had called me directly, something Richard explicitly forbade, asking why their invoice showed a charge for consulting services they'd never received. I'd pulled the records, traced the payment, and found myself falling down a rabbit hole that got darker with every click. The fake vendor was called Apex Business Consulting. Professional website, legitimate-looking address in Delaware, even a customer service number. But when I'd called that number, it went straight to a voicemail box that was full. The Delaware address was a UPS store, and the business registration listed the owner as RT Holdings, Richard Thornton's initials. That night in my car, I'd made a choice. I could walk away, find another job, pretend I'd never seen anything. Or I could fight back. I'd chosen war. The next morning, I'd walked into the office of Patricia Chambers, the only attorney I knew personally, a former college roommate who specialized in employment law. Her office in downtown San Francisco was modest but professional, with diplomas from Berkeley Law covering one wall. Lily, what you're describing is serious, Patricia had said, her expression grave as she reviewed the documents I'd printed. Financial fraud, tax evasion, possibly RICO violations if there's an ongoing criminal enterprise. But you need to understand something. Going after someone like Richard Thornton is dangerous. He has money, connections, and lawyers who specialize in destroying whistleblowers. I know, I'd replied. That's why I need to do this perfectly. Patricia had leaned back in her chair, studying me. You'll need more than just financial records. You'll need proof of intent. Proof that he knew what he was doing was illegal. That means recordings, emails, witnesses. And you'll need to protect yourself legally every step of the way. That's when she'd introduced me to the concept of creating a litigation packet, a comprehensive collection of evidence so airtight that any lawyer would salivate at the opportunity to prosecute. More importantly, she'd connected me with Thomas Wu, a forensic accountant who testified in over 50 fraud cases. Thomas had been skeptical at first. Most people who think they've found fraud have actually found sloppy bookkeeping, he'd said during our first meeting at a coffee shop in the Mission District. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Then I'd shown him my evidence. His skepticism had evaporated. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is systematic theft with a sophisticated cover-up. Whoever's running this operation knows exactly what they're doing. Over the next 4 months, Thomas and I had worked together like forensic detectives. He'd taught me how to trace money through shell companies, how to identify patterns in fraudulent transactions, how to connect seemingly unrelated payments into a coherent narrative of crime. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed something more powerful. I needed Richard to confess in his own words. That's where Marcus Chun had become crucial. I'd approached Marcus carefully. As Richard's business partner, he had access to everything, but he also had the most to lose if the company collapsed. Our first conversation had been brief, cautious, feeling each other out. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus had asked, sitting across from me at a park bench near the ferry building. He'd looked exhausted, older than his 42 years. "Because I think you already know," I'd replied. "And I think you're tired of lying about it." He'd stared at the bay for a long moment. "I never wanted any of this." Richard started small, inflating a few expenses here and there. Then it grew. By the time I realized how deep it went, I was already implicated. If I'd spoken up, I'd have gone down with him. What if I told you there was a way out? I'd asked. Immunity in exchange for cooperation. A clean slate. Marcus had turned to me, hope and fear battling in his eyes. "You've already talked to federal agents?" "Not yet, but I will." "The question is, do you want to be a defendant or a witness?" It had taken him 3 days to decide. 3 days during which I'd barely slept, wondering if he'd run straight to Richard and expose everything. But on the 4th day, Marcus had called me. "I'm in. What do you need?" What I'd needed was access to Richard's private communications. Marcus had provided that, along with something even more valuable. He'd started wearing a wire to his meetings with Richard. The FBI loved cooperating witnesses who brought recordings. But the most satisfying part of my preparation had been so simple it was almost comical. That $49 recording device from Amazon had captured Richard in his full glory. Like the time 2 months ago when Richard had called me into his office after I'd questioned an expense report. "Listen carefully, Lily," he'd said, leaning back in his expensive executive chair. "I hired you because you're good with numbers and you don't ask too many questions. But lately, you've been forgetting your place. You're not a partner. You're not even management. You're an employee, and employees do what they're told or they find new jobs. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Richard," I'd replied, the recorder in my blazer pocket capturing every condescending word. Or the executive meeting 3 weeks ago where Richard had pitched a new cost-saving initiative that involved creating fake freelancer invoices to reduce the company's tax burden. "The IRS doesn't have the resources to audit every small business," he'd said confidently. "As long as we keep each fake invoice under 10,000, we're invisible." Marcus had looked uncomfortable. Sarah Kim from operations had looked confused, but nobody had challenged him. That's what 6 years of Richard's leadership had created. A culture where people knew something was wrong but were too afraid to speak up. I'd stopped being afraid the moment I'd decided to fight back. The FBI had been surprisingly easy to contact. A simple phone call to their San Francisco field office. A brief explanation of what I had. And within 48 hours I'd been sitting across from Special Agents Torres and Park. "Ms. Chen, what you're describing constitutes multiple federal crimes," Agent Torres had said, reviewing the summary Patricia had helped me prepare. "Wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering. If your evidence supports these allegations, we're talking about serious prison time. My evidence is solid, I'd replied, but I need protection. Richard has threatened employees before. If he even suspects I'm investigating him, we'll move quickly, Agent Park had assured me. Once we have everything we need, we'll execute search warrants simultaneously at his office and home. He won't have time to destroy evidence or retaliate. They'd opened their investigation 3 weeks ago. I turned over everything: recordings, financial documents, witness statements from 3 other employees who'd finally agreed to come forward. Marcus's testimony. Thomas Wu had provided expert analysis that laid out the fraud in language even a jury would understand. And then I'd waited for the perfect moment. Richard had made it easy. His arrogance had always been his weakness, and that morning at the airport, he demonstrated exactly why narcissists eventually destroy themselves. He couldn't help but make a scene. Couldn't help but try to humiliate me one final time. Couldn't resist the urge to play the victim while actually being the criminal. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Just saw the news. FBI arrested Richard at SFO. You okay? I typed back. Better than okay? Thank you for everything. Another text. This one from Thomas. Holy shit, Lily, you actually did it. Channel 7 is running the story now. Richard's company is finished. I pulled up the news on my phone. Sure enough, there was Richard's face on the local news website. Tech CEO arrested on federal fraud charges. The article was brief but damaging. Federal agents, investigation, allegations of massive fraud. Richard's carefully crafted public image was disintegrating in real time. But something else was happening that I hadn't anticipated. My phone started ringing with calls from former colleagues. Some were supportive. Others were angry, accusing me of destroying the company and their jobs. One voicemail in particular stood out. It was from Jennifer Park, the HR director who dismissed every complaint I'd ever filed. Lily, this is Jennifer. I need to talk to you. What you said about Richard, about the discrimination, about everything. I have documents, emails, records of complaints from other employees that Richard told me to bury. I was scared to say anything before, but if you're willing to include this in your case, I want to help. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. Too little, too late. But I'd take her evidence anyway. Officer Martinez walked me to my gate. Miss Chen, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of people try to game the system, play victim, manipulate situations. But what you did, that was justice. Real, documented, undeniable justice. I just got tired of being treated like I didn't matter, I replied. He nodded. Well, you matter now. Richard's about to learn exactly how much. As I boarded my flight to New York, the trip I'd actually scheduled weeks ago to meet with a law firm interested in hiring me, I realized something profound. For 6 years, I'd felt powerless. I'd accepted the pay discrimination, the stolen ideas, the constant humiliation because I'd believed I had no choice. But power isn't something people give you. It's something you take by refusing to accept their version of reality. Richard had spent 6 years telling me I was nothing. Now he was sitting in federal custody, facing decades in prison, watching his reputation crumble, while I was flying first class to a job interview at a firm that had offered me 30% more than Richard had ever paid me. The real question wasn't whether Richard would go to prison. The FBI's case was airtight, and with Marcus cooperating, conviction was virtually guaranteed. The real question was whether the people who'd enabled him, the board members who'd ignored red flags, the HR director who'd buried complaints, the employees who'd stayed silent, would finally understand that complicity has consequences too. But that reckoning was still to come. And when it did, it would be spectacular. The call came 3 days after Richard's arrest. I was in my hotel room in Manhattan, reviewing notes for my interview, when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Chun, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney David Morrison. I'm handling the Thornton case. Do you have a moment? I sat down on the edge of the bed. Of course. We've executed search warrants on Mr. Thornton's office, home, and personal vehicles. What we found exceeds even your documentation. Hidden hard drives, offshore account statements, communications with multiple shell companies. Miss Chen, this case is going to be bigger than any of us anticipated. My heart raced. How much bigger? Richard Thornton's fraud totals over $2.3 million across 47 clients over 6 years. He's also implicated in money laundering schemes involving 3 other business owners. We're looking at federal charges that carry a minimum of 15 years, potentially up to 30 with aggravating factors. 2.3 million. I'd uncovered 400,000. There was so much more I hadn't even discovered. There's something else, Morrison continued. Mr. Thornton is requesting a meeting with you. Through his attorney, of course. He wants to apologize. I almost laughed. Apologize? He accused me of theft in front of hundreds of people 3 days ago. His attorney believes he can negotiate a better plea deal if he makes amends with key witnesses. Specifically, you. I'm not advising you either way, but if you agree to meet him, we can arrange it at our field office with full supervision. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Set it up. 2 days later, I walked into the federal building in San Francisco. Agent Torres met me in the lobby, her expression unreadable. Miss Chun, before we go in, you should know that Richard's in bad shape. His wife filed for divorce yesterday. His bail was set at $5 million, which his family refused to post. He spent last night in county jail. The media's been brutal. Good, I said simply. She led me to a conference room on the 4th floor. Through the window in the door, I could see Richard sitting at a table with his attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Richard looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. When I entered the room, he actually flinched. Lily, he said, his voice hoarse. Thank you for coming. I sat across from him saying nothing. Agent Torres and Morrison positioned themselves against the wall, observing. Richard's attorney spoke first. Miss Chun, my client wanted this opportunity to personally apologize for his actions and clear up any misunderstandings. There are no misunderstandings, I interrupted, my eyes locked on Richard. Your client accused me of theft to cover his own crimes. He tried to destroy my reputation to save his own. There's nothing unclear about that. Richard leaned forward, and for a moment, I saw a flash of his old arrogance. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The company was struggling. I made some bad decisions, but I never meant... Stop, I said coldly. You stood in that airport and called me a thief. You told federal agents I'd stolen $15,000. You demanded I be prosecuted. So let's talk about that $15,000, Richard. Where did that number come from? His attorney touched his arm, but he shook her off. It was in the account transfer you made that morning. The transfer you told me to make, I corrected. The one you sent me an email about at 6 a.m., instructing me to move $15,000 from the operating account to the payroll account because you'd forgotten to process payroll. I have that email, Richard. Time-stamped. And I have the reply where I confirmed the transfer was complete. His face went white. That's not, I pulled out my phone and opened my email. Would you like me to read it to you? Lily, I need you to transfer $15,000 from operating to payroll ASAP. Forgot to process Friday's run. Thanks, RT. Sent at 6:47 a.m. on the day you had me arrested. The attorney's pen stopped moving. She looked at Richard with an expression that clearly said, You didn't tell me this. You set me up. I continued, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. You knew federal agents were closing in. You knew Marcus was cooperating. So you created a fake theft, had me execute a legitimate transfer on your orders, then accused me of stealing that exact amount at the airport where you knew there'd be witnesses and security cameras. You thought you could flip the narrative, make yourself the victim, and discredit me before I could testify against you. Richard's hands trembled on the table. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I panicked. The agents had contacted my attorney that morning. I thought if I could show you were stealing, they'd question everything you told them. So you committed additional crimes while already under investigation, Morrison interjected. False accusation. Filing a false police report. Attempted witness intimidation. Mr. Thornton, you just made your situation considerably worse. The attorney closed her notepad with a sharp snap. Richard, stop talking, now. But Richard was past listening. 6 years of unchecked arrogance was finally cracking.
You think you're so smart, Lily. You think you've won.
My family has been in San Francisco for generations.
We have connections you can't even imagine. This will blow over.
I'll pay some fines, do some community service, and be back in business within a year. The delusion was almost sad. Agent Torres pulled out her tablet and set it on the table. Mr. Thornton, maybe you should see what's happening outside this room. She pulled up a news website. The headline read, Tech CEO's fraud scheme uncovered by whistleblower employee. Below it was Richard's mugshot next to a professional photo of me from the company website. But it was the subheadline that made Richard's face crumble. Former partner testifies. Thornton called it his Asian employee's job to take the fall. Marcus said that? Richard whispered. He told them about how you specifically hired me because you thought I'd be compliant and quiet. I finished. About how you told him that having an Asian woman as your senior coordinator was good PR, but that you'd never actually promote me to management. About how you said, and I quote, she never report me because immigrants always fear deportation.
Yes, Richard. Marcus told them everything.
And he recorded you saying it. I'd been born in Sacramento. My parents had been born in California. My grandparents had immigrated legally in 1972, but Richard had never bothered to learn any of that. To him, I was just the Asian girl who'd been convenient until she wasn't. Agent Torres swiped to another article. The San Francisco Chronicle ran this an hour ago. They interviewed 8 of your former employees. All of them described systematic discrimination, harassment, and financial misconduct. 3 separate employment lawyers have already reached out offering to represent them in a class action lawsuit.
Richard's attorney stood.
This meeting is over.
Richard, don't say another word.
But I wasn't done. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder copies of documents I kept for myself. I slid them across the table. These are the recordings I made over 6 months.
43 conversations where you detailed your fraud, admitted to tax evasion, used racial slurs about clients and employees, and bragged about manipulating the system. The FBI has the originals, but I thought you might want to see the transcripts.
So you can understand exactly how thoroughly you destroyed yourself. Richard opened the folder with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the first page, a transcript of him explaining to Marcus how to create fake vendor invoices.
The second page showed him mocking a client's accent. The third page detailed his plan to blame me if anything went wrong.
Every word you said, Richard.
Every lie. Every scheme.
Every moment you thought you were untouchable. I documented all of it. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something I'd never seen before. Complete defeat. Why? He asked, his voice breaking. Why did you do this to me? The question was so absurd I almost didn't answer, but I wanted him to understand. I didn't do this to you, Richard. You did this to yourself.
Every fraudulent transaction, every discriminatory comment, every employee you bullied and underpaid, those were your choices.
I just made sure there were consequences. His attorney was pulling him toward the door now, but Richard turned back one last time. I gave you a job. I paid you good money. This is how you repay me? You paid me 30% less than my male colleagues for the same work. You stole my ideas and passed them as your own. You created a hostile work environment where I had to document everything just to protect myself from being fired or framed. And when your crimes caught up with you, you tried to destroy my life to save yours. So no, Richard. You didn't give me anything except 6 years of reasons to take you down. The door closed behind them. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Morrison smiled slightly.
Miss Chun, that was the most comprehensive witness statement I've ever seen delivered as a personal message.
With what you just got him to admit on record, he gestured to the camera mounted in the corner of the room. His attorney's going to have a very difficult time negotiating any kind of favorable deal. Good, I said again. My phone buzzed.
A text from Patricia. Turn on channel 4. Now. I pulled up the live stream on my phone. A reporter stood outside Thornton Digital Solutions office building.
Behind her, employees were streaming out, carrying boxes. Company is effectively shutting down following the arrest of CEO Richard Thornton. Sources inside the firm say the board of directors held an emergency meeting this morning and voted unanimously to dissolve the company. Several major clients have already pulled their contracts, and the reporter paused, touching her earpiece. We're now getting reports that the IRS has frozen all company assets pending investigation into tax fraud allegations. It was over.
Richard's company, his reputation, his freedom, all of it gone, and honestly, if you've stuck with this story hoping to see justice served the way it should be, you're about to witness something even better than revenge. Because what happened next showed that sometimes the universe has a sense of poetic justice that even the best planned vindication can't match. The question now wasn't whether Richard would face consequences. That was already decided. The real question was, what would happen to the employees he'd left behind, the clients he'd defrauded, and the woman who'd brought down an empire by simply refusing to stay silent? 18 months later, I stood in front of floor-to-ceiling windows on the 42nd floor of a building in Lower Manhattan, looking out over the city. My office. My corner office, to be precise, director of financial oversight at Sterling & Associates, one of the most respected consulting firms in the country. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard used to brag about his modest 20th floor office in San Francisco. Now I was literally above where he'd ever reached, in every sense of the word. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Former tech CEO Richard Thornton sentenced to 23 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering. 23 years. With credit for time served and good behavior, he'd be 71 when he got out, if he got out. The judge had been particularly harsh during sentencing, citing Richard's callous disregard for the law and systematic exploitation of employees and clients. The article included details I already knew from Morrison's updates. Richard had lost everything. His houses, both the Pacific Heights mansion and the Lake Tahoe cabin, that was actually worth $3 million, had been seized and sold to pay restitution to defrauded clients. His wife had divorced him and gotten primary custody of their 2 daughters, who'd apparently changed their last names to distance themselves from their father's crimes. His elderly parents had released a public statement expressing profound disappointment and shame. Marcus Chun, by contrast, had received 2 years probation and community service in exchange for his testimony. He'd also started a nonprofit helping small businesses implement ethical financial practices. Last I heard, he was doing well, sleeping better at night than he had in years. My desk phone rang. "Lily, your 3 o'clock is here," my assistant said. "Send them in." The door opened, and Jennifer Park walked in nervously. The former HR director from Thornton Digital Solutions looked smaller somehow, less confident than I remembered. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, sitting across from my desk. "I wasn't sure you would. You helped bring down Richard in the end," I replied neutrally. "Your documentation of buried complaints was crucial to the Department of Labor's investigation." She nodded, wringing her hands. "I've been blacklisted in HR circles. No one will hire me after what happened. But I heard you're building a new compliance department here, and I needed to ask if you consider..." "Jennifer, you had 6 years to do the right thing," I interrupted. "You dismissed my complaints. You enabled Richard's discrimination. You protected the company instead of the employees." "I know." Her voice cracked. "I was scared. Scared of losing my job, my reputation, everything, but that's not an excuse. What happened to you? What I let happen to you. I live with that guilt every day." I studied her for a long moment. She'd aged visibly since Richard's arrest. The shame had clearly taken its toll. "I'm not hiring you," I said finally. "But I know someone who might. There's a legal aid organization in Oakland that needs an HR consultant to help workers document workplace abuse. The pay is a fraction of what you made before. The work is hard. But if you're serious about making amends, that's where you start." She nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you for not just dismissing me. I'm not in the business of destroying people, Jennifer. I just refuse to let them destroy me." After she left, I turned back to my computer. 3 job applications sat in my inbox, all from former Thornton Digital employees who'd heard I was hiring.
Good people who'd been caught in Richard's collapse.
I'd already hired 4 of them. They were thriving.
My door opened again. Patricia walked in without knocking, grinning widely. Have you seen the offer letter from Harvard Business School? I pulled up the email.
They wanted me to do a guest lecture series on corporate fraud detection and whistleblower protections.
Ethics and Leadership, a case study. The irony that Richard used to boast about his Stanford MBA was delicious. Are you going to do it? Patricia asked. Absolutely.
Someone needs to teach the next generation that compliance isn't weakness, it's strength. My cell phone buzzed.
With a text from an unknown number. Ms. Chen, this is Sarah Kim from Thornton Digital.
I'm testifying in a civil suit against Richard next month. Would you be willing to provide a character witness statement?
Your courage inspired me to come forward about my own experiences.
Sarah, the operations director who'd sat silently in that meeting where Richard outlined his tax fraud scheme.
She'd reached out 6 months ago to apologize and explain that she'd been
documenting everything too. She just hadn't known how to use it until my case showed her. I typed back. Of course.
Send me the details.
The truth was, my actions had created a ripple effect I'd never anticipated. 8 other employees from Richard's company had filed their own lawsuits. Discrimination, wage theft, hostile work environment. 3 had won significant settlements.
The rest were pending.
But the most satisfying outcome had nothing to do with money.
Last month, California had passed new legislation strengthening whistleblower protections and requiring independent fraud audits for companies over a certain size. The bill's sponsor had specifically cited my case as an example of why such protections were necessary. The Lily Chan Protection Act, one newspaper had jokingly called it. Richard had spent 6 years trying to convince me I was powerless, insignificant, easily replaceable.
Now his crimes had inspired state legislation, his prison sentence was headline news, and I was being invited to teach at Ivy League schools about corporate ethics.
My success wasn't just about the promotion or the salary, though that was nice.
It was about proving that doing the right thing, even when it's terrifying, even when it seems impossible, can actually work. You don't have to accept injustice. You don't have to stay silent when you see corruption. You don't have to let people with power and privilege determine your worth.
But, and this is crucial, you have to be smart about it.
Document everything. Build an airtight case. Find allies. Protect yourself legally. Don't just fight back in anger. Fight back strategically. My office phone rang again. This time it was Morrison. Lily, thought you'd want to know.
Richard's appeal was denied. The conviction stands. He'll be transferred to a federal facility in Texas next week. How's he doing? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Morrison paused. Honestly?
Not well, he's finally understanding what he lost.
His daughters won't take his calls.
His former business associates won't visit.
He's completely isolated. Part of me, a very small part, felt something that might have been sympathy.
But then I remembered standing in that airport, being accused of theft in front of hundreds of people. I remembered 6 years of stolen ideas, discrimination, and gaslighting. Thank you for the update, I said simply.
As evening fell over Manhattan, I packed up my briefcase and headed out. Tomorrow, I had meetings with 3 potential clients, all of them wanting Sterling and Associates to audit their companies for fraud vulnerabilities. They all specifically requested me. The woman who'd brought down Richard Thornton had become the person companies hired to make sure they didn't become the next Richard Thornton.
On my subway ride home, I thought about that scared woman who'd sat in her car 18 months ago, staring at evidence of fraud and deciding whether to risk everything.
She'd been terrified, uncertain, aware that fighting back might destroy her career, her reputation, her entire life. But she'd fought anyway.
And that decision, that single moment of choosing courage over compliance, had changed everything.
Richard tried to destroy me, but he ended up destroying himself. I learned that the best revenge isn't returning the pain someone inflicted on you.
It's building something so successful, so meaningful, so powerful that they can't help but see exactly what they lost when they underestimated you. To everyone who's ever been told they're not good enough, smart enough, or important enough to challenge injustice, you are. Document everything, find your allies, and never let anyone convince you that staying silent is safer than fighting back.
Because sometimes, the person they tried to break becomes the person who exposes every crack in their foundation.